What I want to talk about today is something that I think is of interest around the world, and that is the ability of all fiber types to cause disease. There's one fiber type called chrysotile that the people that are paid large amounts of money and governments that have economic benefit still want to promote and use throughout the world. What I would like to do is show you the reason why this should not be. I'm going to use Canada as an example. Today is election day in Canada. They're electing a new prime minister, and with the election of a new prime minister, so may be the history of asbestos in Canada today. I spent a week last week in Canada working with one of the trade unions, and I was very encouraged that maybe asbestos and its promotion by the Canadian government will be something of an end after this election, but we will have to see what happens. What I want to do is bring you in to open the door of the mind and let you see the evidence and let you judge the evidence. And I'm going to use Canada, as I said. The discovery of chrysotile occurred in the middle 1800s. Chrysotile asbestos was discovered in Quebec, Canada, and production started around 1860. And the mining increased in the late 1800s. And there are two major regions of mining in Canada that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail later. But one of the things that the Canadian government and other governments around the world that promote the use of chrysotile have been doing is saying, well, it can be used safely. Well, we have an example here in the mine of one worker with a respirator and another worker without a respirator. Do we call this safe use? They're both doing similar work. We have the Quebec Asbestos Mining Association that has been trying to tell us for many years that chrysotile is a safe form of asbestos and can be used safely, and they have recruited generation after generation of their employees and geologists to tell us this. Let us look at these two fiber types. Chrysotile is a serpentine named because of its structure. It's a curved fiber. It's hollow in the center. This is what it looks like. It is a sheet silicate. This is more of a gross picture if you compare it as a sandwich with the ore on the top and the bottom and the fibers sandwiched in between. They take the ore off and then take the fibers out. We'll show you a better picture in a moment. It's mined in Canada, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, Russia. Russia is the big producer today. 95% of all the asbestos that was used, not only in the United States but around the world, has come from chrysotile. Let us move to amphibole. This is the type of fiber more relevant to South Africa because it has been mined here for many years. As we know, it's not mined anymore. It's straight and solid. It's spear-like and doesn't break down like the chrysotile fibers do. It's something that we call in the rock formation a double plane of tetrahydra. It's mined in was mined in South Africa. And another type of amphibole is called anthophyllite, mined in Finland. Now this type of fiber represents about 5% of all the fibers used. So you can see why those with economic interests may be pushing for chrysotile to be the safe form of asbestos. This is what chrysotile looks like when it comes out of the mine. As I said, the rock is around it and the fibers are embedded in the veins of chrysotile within the rock. Now, as we go through the next slides, these are just going to show like acoustical plaster. I'm just going to have in the background some of the various uses of asbestos so you can see how widely used asbestos has been in the world. But this is what chrysotile looks like, and these are the fibers that are sandwiched in between the rock. The early findings began around the late 1800s with reports of disease in the United Kingdom, in France and Italy. In 1912, the Canadian Department of Labor denied that there was any health effects of asbestos, and they continue to deny this today. In 1930, the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, a large insurance company in North America, started funding the Industrial Hygiene Department of McGill University, a very prestigious university in Canada. And at McGill, they claimed that there were no cases of pneumoconiosis, that's what asbestosis is, from Canada, even though the metropolitan insurance offices had reports of claims for the disease. It became a major market, as you can see on the chart here, in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. It still was going up throughout the world. It's starting to come down now, and the only real use of asbestos is the chrysotile type of asbestos today. But let me tell you what the alchemists, as I like to call these people that try and show that chrysotile is a harmless form of asbestos, do. They like to create doubt. They like to obscure the facts. And they like to bring that to our attention. In 1940 in Quebec, the Johns Manville, which was a large mining industry in North America and a producer of asbestos products, denied any of the world's literature at that time concerning the health effects from asbestos, even though their own records of employees with greater than 10 years of exposure showed they had cases of asbestosis occurring in their workers. The wives of the workers became so concerned about these diseases occurring that they went to their provincial health officers, their councils, and they even went to the Carey Manufacturing Company, which is another manufacturer and miner of asbestos in North America, and brought to their attention the problems occurring to their husbands who were working as miners. Well, what happened? There were a lot of promises made and little work that was done on behalf of the wives or the miners themselves. There were medical textbooks that were printed based upon the records from McGill University and others that said there is no problem with these dusts and that the workers do not suffer from the disease asbestosis. This was as late as the late 1940s, when just 4 years later, the Encyclopedia Britannica that is found in libraries throughout the world was reporting not only asbestosis but lung cancer as being problems in the area of asbestos-related disease. A journalist in Canada reported that so little disease was being reported that maybe it was due to it being misdiagnosed as tuberculosis. Well, both the Canadian Medical Association and the government have denied this and continue to deny this today. What happened in 1952 was very important in Canada, and it was very important for the rest of the world, because we had 2 cases of mesothelioma first showing up in people that were mining chrysotile asbestos. And while this is a small number of cases, keep in mind we're talking about a disease that today is only, the true incidence is probably unknown, but we believe it to be somewhere in the neighborhood of less than 1 per million per year. So it's a very rare disease. And even in the highest exposed asbestos populations, only about 9 to 10% of the workers ever develop mesothelioma. So it's a very rare disease. 90% of people exposed to asbestos do not develop mesothelioma. He went on, the mine physician that reported the 2 cases, to report 128 cases of asbestosis. We go on, and the mine doctor, Dr. Cartier, made the statement that more frequently it, referring to asbestosis, remains a disease which can be tolerated quite well for many years. The disease may look more serious and cause important medical legal problems if a too scientific medical concept or a too liberal social interpretation is accepted by medical legal professionals, labor and compensation bodies. Let's sweep it under the rug, let's not do very much about it. And that was occurring throughout North America and the rest of the world. British medical authorities came to visit Canada, and their visits and the information were kept confidential. Why am I showing you all this? What am I showing you this for? I'm showing you this to demonstrate to you that this information has been swept under the rug for many, many years. As a public health official who started studying asbestos in 1970 when I became a public health service officer in the United States, had we taken action 20, 30 years before, I would not have needed to continue studying asbestos and its effects in the United States or the rest of the world if we had taken the advice of these scientists that I'm showing the information on the screen. Well, this was getting out of hand to the point that the news media was starting to pick it up by the 1970s. And what was going on was that the Canadians, through McGill University, started their epidemiological studies. And what they found were there were higher rates of mesothelioma and disease in one mining area compared to another mining area. So why was this? What was happening in this Thetford mine area? I told you we'd talk about the 2 mine areas a little bit more later. Well, here in the Thetford mine area, we had a higher rate of disease than we found in the asbestos region. That's the name of a town, by the way, in Canada, Asbestos. If you go on the internet, for those of you that like to look at the internet, you'll see that Asbestos, the town, has decided to change their name and they're looking for a new name. It's very interesting to read on the internet if you have the time or the interest. Well, the idea of why this was occurring sent the alchemists, these people that spread doubt and mess with their facts, back to the drawing board to see what was going on. And lo and behold, they found an article in the literature that said the significance of low-level amphibole exposure in predominantly chrysotile mines was not appreciated until studies of fibers in lungs using electron microscopy showed the high lung burden of amphibole fibers in the 1970s and the 1980s. This was by Peter Elms, later a consultant to Turner Brothers, a large asbestos company that I'm sure most of you in South Africa are aware of. Well, it was tremolite then, this other fiber that was an amphibole that caused the disease. It wasn't the chrysotile, so hey, we don't have a real problem. So what do? Well, we go back and we look at the Thetford area and we say that's why the difference. But what we find is when we look at the Thetford area, and this is a paper that I and colleagues in the Public Health Service wrote several years ago, we found that what Dr. Vignon in France had reported, that when you look at the mining area of Thetford compared to the mining area of asbestos, the disease was really proportional to the number of miners that were in the 2 areas. So this doesn't let you use tremolite as the sole explanation. Now let us talk about lung burden studies. You'll hear more at this conference about lung burden studies. That chrysotile gets in the lung and gets out, and it gets out real quick. And so many people want you to believe then that if it gets in the lung and gets out, it doesn't cause a problem. So let's look at that. Chrysotile and tremolite, that the amphibole forms, amosite can be put in here too, have a residence time in the lung of a very long time. Once it gets in the lung, it stays in the lung. Chrysotile, on the other hand, doesn't. So where does the mesothelioma occur? Let us look at this first. It occurs in the lining outside the lung, outside the parenchyma of the lung. It doesn't occur in the lung. So it occurs outside the lung. And that's a very important concept to remember. And the same is true of peritoneal mesotheliomas that are occurring in workers and others exposed to asbestos. Now, some of the experiments, and you'll hear, I think, Dr. Bernstein talk about this later, that a great portion of the chrysotile leaves, and that's what I was saying, 99%. But where does that chrysotile go? Well, if you look at what Dr. Craighead and Brooke Mossman said in 1982, that much current debate centers around the question of whether all types of asbestos pose the capacity to induce mesothelioma. Well, let us look at what animal experimentation said. Experiments in animals yield an affirmative answer. So what is Dr. Craighead saying? He is saying that animal experimentation confirmed convincingly that all forms of asbestos cause mesothelioma. A new book just came out in 2008 by Dr. Craighead and Helen Gibbs, both who have worked very tirelessly to continue the idea that chrysotile is much less hazardous. But if you look at their new book, and it's not gotten good reviews, it is said overall, this is a review in the New England Journal of Medicine, that overall this book is a rich source of historical facts and studies on asbestos and its diseases, yet highly personalized with strong individual viewpoints. It is less authoritative as a source of risk assessment and litigation issues. But why do I bring this book up? I bring it up because even in this book, that is getting very bad reviews for its personalization and its idea that some form of chrysotile is safe, even these scientists that are writing this book do not negate the role of chrysotile and have to admit it is necessary for these fibers to get to the pleural to cause disease. Fiber translocation, which you're going to hear more about at this conference in the breakout session, is a slow process. It takes a long time for some fibers to translocate to other areas of the body, but where do they go? Well, the chrysotile asbestos fiber seems to occur and get out of the lung, but it occurs about 30 times more prominently in the pleura, where the mesotheliomas are developing, than do the amphibole fibers. Some years ago, I wrote a paper that talked about how we know that chrysotile can cause mesothelioma. I applied a critique methodology that was proposed in 1965 by Sir Bradford Hill, a scientist in Great Britain. And it said, you don't just look at the epidemiological literature, which is very limited in the area of chrysotile because there are very few cohorts that are ever exposed to pure chrysotile. Tremolite, the amphibole, is almost always found as contaminant before chrysotile occurred. So what I have done is put these different areas to look at, and I just want to briefly show you these to show you that they meet this criteria. Biological plausibility. It is not the chemical composition of the asbestos fiber alone that is important in its ability to produce disease. The health effects of asbestos are related primarily to its morphology, that is, its shape and its size. Inhaled chrysotile fibers have a tendency to split and dissolve and create smaller fibers. The consensus view is that chrysotile asbestos is carcinogenic and is capable of causing and contributing to the development of lung cancer, asbestosis, and other diseases. And this is a consensus that was not only, this is not my thoughts, this is something that dates back to the mid-1970s that the International Agency for Research on Cancer has commented on. And such prominent figures in asbestos research as Dr. Chris Wagner, who happened to be on that committee with me at the time, concurred that chrysotile could and does cause mesothelioma. Unfortunately, his conclusions changed after that meeting, and several unfortunate events have shown that his influence was probably changed because he received $6,000 a year from the Owens, Illinois asbestos company for keeping that opinion. And that has been documented by the United States Public Health Service in their Public Health Service reports, as well as other magazine reports. And that's an unfortunate legacy for a great researcher who I had a lot of respect for in my early years. Mesotheliomas develop in the pleura. Peritoneum, as I said, is biologically plausible that chrysotile can cause disease in the lung, and also studies indicate that chrysotile can penetrate individual cells and it can cause cellular damage. All of these are prerequisites to the development of cancer. Coherence. What is coherence? It asks if the causal theory is not inconsistent with what we already know of the injury or disease. It is universally accepted that chrysotile reaches the pleura, the area where the disease occurs. So that's one step. It is universally accepted that chrysotile is carcinogenic, going back to what IARC has said repeatedly, including currently as we stand here today in 2008. And there is no biological argument that I'm aware of that explains why chrysotile is incapable of causing disease. What is strength of association? It's a reflection of the strength of the effect in a given study. Well, first, mesothelioma is rarely found in any population that has not had exposure to asbestos. About 80% of all asbestos are all people that develop mesothelioma develop it as a result of exposure to asbestos. So strong is that association that the U.S. government has published a paper showing and calling mesothelioma a signal tumor, meaning that once it occurs, it is more likely than not that there was some asbestos association with its occurrence. Also, I talked about, under strength of association, the rarity of disease, coupled with the lack of mortality rates in the populations used as controls, and problems in diagnosing have made it very difficult. So many people want to say because epidemiology does not really show definitive evidence, this is evidence showing that chrysotile does not cause disease. But I think that when you look at the rest of the evidence, such as the biological association, etc., you'll see that this is not true. Like all of the other forms of asbestos, there is a biological gradient. That is a dose response. So the greater the amount of asbestos that you breathe, the greater the amount of disease. The same is true with chrysotile, as you can see on this animal experimentation report. increase the dose, the rate of disease in the animals increase. There have been consistency reports, and this is important. How frequently do we see this consistently occurring in populations that are predominantly exposed to chrysotile? Well, in one study in Germany, 843 cases of mesothelioma were looked at, and it was determined that 67 of the cases were exposed to only chrysotile. That was the only background that they could find for these cases of mesothelioma. We see in the chrysotile minors in Canada consistently occurring. Studies out of Italy, which I'll show you more about in just a moment. A study that a friend of mine, Ruban Beloy, did in Zimbabwe has also shown chrysotile as a cause of mesothelioma. We see it in studies in Louisiana, in the United States, in England and Germany. We see it in mechanics that work with chrysotile asbestos and asbestos brakes. We see it in railroad workers that have worked with asbestos. We even see it in the wives of textile workers that have worked in New York with friction products. Continuing, we see it in England. The consistency is very strong, but let me show you just a few studies. And these are studies that are almost exclusively chrysotile only with no contamination, but after the studies have been published, contamination. But let me point out one of these studies, the very first one, the Palliative study. Let me show you this. When they talk about after early exposure, and many of these cohorts that we were looking at today, the majority of the populations in these cohorts have not reached that 30 to 40 years of latency to develop disease. Here's the Italian study. In 1990, 2 cases of asbestos. This is from Malignant, chrysotile, Italy, chrysotile mine. 2 cases of asbestos occurred. And keep in mind this latency. This was in 1990. In 2001, we had 5 cases occur. The latency is increasing as we see the population increase. Today, in 2008, we see in just that small group of minors, we have 6 cases of mesothelioma, but now we have 14 cases of mesothelioma occurring in people that were workers in the mills around the mine, and also we have 13 cases occurring in people that live in the mining area, around the dumps, the things that you're talking about here this week. So we are seeing, as the latency period increases, we're seeing more and more disease. These are other studies. A study that I did back in 1971 and then published again in 1979. In the first study, we saw no mesotheliomas. When we published it almost 10 years later, we saw 17 cases of mesothelioma. So as the latency increases, the disease increases, and the amount of disease increases. This is an example of what most of us that live in urban populations experience in our lung. These are asbestos bodies, but even going back to 1925, this early evidence was known. Experimental evidence has continued to confirm the ability of chrysotile asbestos to cause disease in laboratory animals. The experimental evidence, and I'm not going to read all of these in light of time, continue to show in 1963 how chrysotile can cause disease in animals. 1964, we continue to see this occurring. Now, there's one thing, when we're doing the epidemiological studies, and I know I'm getting very technical, and I hope that I can bring this down. We have really studied populations exposed to fibers greater, by definition, greater than 5 micron in length. Because our analytical methods did not measure these short fibers that were occurring, we have given a clean bill of health, or many people have given a clean bill of health to short fibers. That is unfortunate, because we know today that the amount of and the type of fibers people are exposed to, as we have better technology, are that the majority of fibers that people breathe in are really shorter than 5 micron in length. So I think this is important. Continuing with early experimental evidence, Chrysotile is continually implicated in the development of disease, and I'll go through these very quickly. But we see that mesothelioma occurs, but in all of these experiments and all of the talk that we talk about Chrysotile being a safe fiber, it's always very little talk given to lung cancer and asbestosis, two diseases that probably account for much more death and disease than do the mesotheliomas. The laboratory experiments, yes, and we've said this repeatedly. And the International Agency for Research on Cancer just confirmed that animal experimentation are suitable for projecting the ability of something to cause cancer in humans. Analogy. Do similar substances cause similar diseases? There's no reason for us to believe that Chrysotile, which is an asbestos, should not cause disease, because the other forms of asbestos do cause disease, and we've just gone through a lot of evidence showing that it does cause disease. If you compare the animal data and the human data, you'll see that amosite, crucidolite, and Chrysotile all have been shown to cause cellular damage, genetic damage, fibrosis, cancer, mesothelioma in animals, as well as asbestosis, cancer, and mesothelioma in humans. Now, all of these organizations around the world, the World Health Organization, the International Labor Organization, the World Trade Organization, all of these organizations also in the United States have shown and concluded that Chrysotile does indeed cause asbestos-related disease, and there's no doubt about it. What about mixed exposures? That's what most of the people are exposed to. They're not exposed to Chrysotile alone. They're exposed to mixed exposures. What few studies we have would show that mixed exposures are even more significant in causing disease than exposure to one of the fiber types alone. So if you have Chrysotile and other fiber types such as amphibole together, the increased risk can go up to almost 6 times greater than the risk of disease for any of these alone. And so we want to be concerned about these mixtures, and that's what most of us are going to be encountering when we're looking at cleaning up areas of waste. We're going to be seeing the tremolite and the Chrysotile and the amphiboles all mixed together. I want to go through, finally, what asbestos does. In a study that we did some years ago, we found an excess of suicide, and when we went back and looked at the suicides, we found underlying cases of asbestos-related disease. So this is not something that just deals with the lungs and with the pleura and the peritoneum, but it can also cause devastation to the family, because we've seen excesses of suicides in populations of workers exposed. It can cause laryngeal cancer. This has been confirmed by the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, as well as IARC and others. Pleural mesothelioma. Cor pulmonale, what is this? This is an enlargement of the right side of the heart due to the asbestosis generally causing difficulty in breathing. The heart as a muscle increases in size, and this is another sequelae of the effects of asbestos. Lung cancer, asbestosis, peritoneal mesothelioma, gastrointestinal cancers. Most major studies have shown an excess of various gastrointestinal cancers occurring in people exposed to asbestos. And minor, but asbestos skin warts can occur. These are just little implantations of the fibers in the skin. They can be not dangerous as far as disease, but they can certainly cause a lot of irritation. So look at all the different things that we get from this one substance. Over 40 countries have now banned the use of asbestos around the world. I regret to say that the United States is not one of them. We do have very strict controls on asbestos in our country, and the Senate of the United States last year passed a ban, but we're still waiting for the United States House of Representatives to do the same. But Canada hasn't passed a ban. Russia's not passed a ban. I'm very happy to say and glad to see that South Africa has passed a ban, but many of your neighbors have not that are major producers of asbestos, and I'd like to see them consider this also. But I applaud South Africa for their role in joining the rest of the world in concluding that asbestos, all forms, are dangerous. This is just a slide to show you that as the production has gone up, as you see here in the top left-hand corner, so have the amount of ferruginous bodies. Remember I said most of us have these in our lung. This is an indication of exposure to asbestos. And as we have increased world production, we have increased the number of people that have these asbestos bodies in their lung. Well, let me conclude by a few comments. A few years ago, we had a conference in Budapest where we brought all of the former countries of the Soviet Union together to talk about their experience with asbestos. And what did they say? And keep in mind, Russia is one of the countries very strongly pushing with their asbestos industry to say chrysotile is safe. Well, these are countries that used almost exclusively Russian chrysotile asbestos when they were members of the former Soviet Union. What do they say? And you'll see as I put these up, asbestosis, lung cancer, mesothelioma is occurring in all of these countries. And at this conference, Russia still contended that they have no problem with chrysotile. But all of the countries that use their asbestos seem to do have problems. So something must happen to the asbestos as it bleeds and crosses the border from Russia to these other countries. It becomes toxic. But I think that, we need to look at these countries that are major producers of asbestos, of chrysotile, and ask the question, why do they still promote the use of asbestos? And various organizations, and I'm just showing this, show that that is not true. Where is Canada? In the next few weeks, there's a conference in Rome called the Rotterdam Conference where we talk about toxic chemicals. For the last several sessions, Canada and Russia have blocked the idea of putting chrysotile on this toxic list. I suppose that they'll probably try and do that this time also. But Canada does have a report on chrysotile asbestos that was commissioned by the Quebec health authorities. Unfortunately, they will not release the report, but two of the people that were very instrumental, Dr. Trevor Ogden, who's the editor of the Occupational and Environmental Medicine, in Great Britain was chair of that group, and Dr. Leslie Stainer, a colleague of mine, is also on the committee, have both written comments about why will they not release the report. I suspect that after the Rotterdam conference you may see the report released. But according to the sources that I have, it does say very definitely that chrysotile causes all of the asbestos-related diseases. But why, Canada, are they holding this back? In a paper that I just published in a non-peer-reviewed journal, but in a journal called India's Asbestos Time Bomb, we have several copies here that if any of you are interested, I'd be happy to give to you. I talk about the profit-driven frenzy of the asbestos industry and how they use smoking mirrors. And in a profit-driven frenzy, the asbestos alchemists peddle their toxic wares to ill-informed governments and consumers. But blow away their smoke, remove their mirrors, and the truth emerges for all to see. All forms of asbestos are deadly. There is no safe concentration of exposure. Identified that industry propaganda is unreliable and the continued use of chrysotile is unconscionable. Here in Africa, you'll see that almost 12 million people are exposed to asbestos. These are figures from the World Health Organization. Controlled use, as Canada and Russia and other producers of asbestos promote, is it really something that's happened? Even in the World Health Organization bulletin, controlled use is not occurring as you see this worker working directly with the asbestos with no mask, and dust is visible throughout. Here we have the conclusions of WHO that all types of asbestos cause asbestosis, mesothelioma, and lung cancer. Again, I show you some pictures and ask you, is controlled use something? Ask Harry Harris, whose right lung, is obliterated because of mesothelioma. Do we really have controlled use? As we spend the rest of this conference looking at the dumps and the areas where asbestos has been left open around the cities, as the mayor talks about, do we really have controlled use? Are our children at risk of disease? And you've heard about the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization, but I bring to you, as Linda did, our wish to help you in cleaning up your situation and working with you and trying to develop strategies to prevent further disease and death from asbestos exposure. So thank you.